My guest today is James Esses.
I was in the public sector in the UK, working in the government for a number of years. Thankfully, that's now behind me. And I'm now a psychotherapist, and I've been practicing for about a year now. And I mean, that's my day job, but my hobby, as we might call it, is trying to campaign on issues around free speech and some of the concerns I've got about some of the nefarious ideologies that have been seeping into society, and looking at it from a psychological perspective, because I think they're doing quite a bit of harm to people's mental health. So that's me in a nutshell.
All right. And as I was just saying, I'm a huge fan of your work. I've listened to you on quite a few podcasts, and the pushback, your pushback against woke craziness is wonderful. And I wanted to start maybe with your pushback against the climate craziness in Britain, in schools.
Yeah. I mean, the climate catastrophizing, as I might put it, is one of the most worrying things going on, because obviously, I mean, climate change in some form exists, and I don't proclaim myself to be an expert in that sphere. But the problem is that because that's a normalized conversation to have, we see a lot of catastrophizing and ideology then seeping in. And I think this is really playing with children's emotions. Now, we see this come out in different forms. So to give an example that I saw recently, there's some schools in the United Kingdom that are now holding what they call Blue Nose Days. And these are days that are meant to raise awareness about climate change. And essentially what they do during the Blue Nose Day is that during the winter months of the year, they'll pick a day and they'll turn off all of the central heating in the school so that the children are essentially freezing cold. Now, I don't think that's great, if I'm honest, right? Because not only is that, I think, probably doing a bit of emotional damage to children, but also could cause them to get a bit unwell at the same time. So but this type of virtue signaling is increasingly celebrated in our society. But it's also coming into the classroom in terms of what's actually being taught. I mean, I sent someone along to record a conference that was being held for educational psychologists in the UK. And they're often working in the classroom, and they're often working with children who have special educational needs, children with autism, etc., who are, particularly vulnerable, I would say, to forms of indoctrination. And they were really engaging in forms of kind of climate alarmism. One of the psychologists speaking said that everyone feels climate emotion, and that it's important to work through with children what their climate emotions are. And they've got different props that they use. They've got dice that they use, in which a child can roll the dice and then it will give them an emotion that they might want to talk about. There's this wheel, it's called the climate emotions wheel, where children are asked to pick out on this wheel what emotion best represents their relationship with climate change. But interestingly, about 75% of the wheel is made up of negative emotions. And these include emotions like despair, betrayal, depression. So this is really working children up and panicking them, I would say, about climate change. And it's not at all nuanced at all.
Yeah, I think I first became aware of you when I saw that you had posted this crazy climate wheel. Another thing you posted is a blob where kids are supposed to, I don't know if they're supposed to pick out how they feel about climate change, where one blob is falling from a tree to its death. Crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely mental. And it all seems to be geared towards panicking children about climate change. It almost feels as if these educators want children to be worried. I think if a child turned around to them and said, I've got no concerns about climate change, I'm feeling pretty relaxed about it, I bet that would not go down well, and they would be challenged for that. So I think there's a clear motive on the part of these educators.
So this stuff, I think, was targeted at younger students, but you also tweeted about a climate justice degree at Sussex University, that you can actually get a degree in that, I guess.
In the same way you can get a degree in gender studies these days as well. I mean, this is the problem. It's absolutely everywhere. And then we wonder why you've got people behaving in the most erratic way. I mean, we've got, I'm sure you've got it over there, but in the UK, we've got various climate change activist groups. And they're willing to do all sorts of things to try and raise awareness of the climate catastrophe. And that ranges from vandalizing works of art and throwing tins of soup over them to also laying down and blocking traffic. And that includes blocking ambulances. We've seen that in London, for example. And they say that it's a worthy cause because it raises awareness about the emergency taking place in the world. And yet they don't care if an ambulance doesn't get to a dying person. That's where we're at with it. And these people often get charged with offences, but then also they often get acquitted, which is interesting. Even if they're banged to rights, they're often getting acquitted. So we seem to be in a bit of a strange space in society at the moment in which people seem to be able to get away with acts of vandalism and other forms of criminality in the name of climate activism.
So do you think that in Britain, though, that you are a little bit past the peak of the climate wokeness? It sounds like that some of these people are starting to get stiffer sentences. So is it getting a little better, or is it still at a peak right now?
I think it's still pretty prevalent. Yeah. Yes, certain people have had the book thrown at them, but others have been let off the hook completely. Sports and arts and cultural events are still being targeted by a lot of these activists. And as I said, this stuff has been actively pushed in schools. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I mean, we also see the rise of the Green Party in the United Kingdom. I mean, they've shot up in the polls recently since they elected their new leader, who is also a bit of an enigma of a human being. But they seem to be cutting through with their message, and their message, again, very much is climate catastrophizing. So I unfortunately, I don't see this going anywhere fast.
So I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about how you seem like you are really cutting through on X. That you had one tweet here I'm looking at that I'm just going to read it. It says, we are not cis male or cis female. We are simply male or female, no prefix required. And that has over 100 million views. I think maybe Elon Musk retweeted it. So that must make you happy that you're getting big visibility on Twitter, not just on that one, but you have a lot of tweets that have over 100,000 views, it looks like.
Yeah, the message does seem to cut through. I mean, people are really concerned about this stuff. And I'm not jazzing things up particularly. I don't have to put any spin on it because these things speak for themselves. You know, quite often people send me stuff every day. People are sending me emails or DMs, including whistleblowers from organizations with concerning company policies or things that they've had taught to their children in schools. And I'm essentially just trying to be the conduit for that, really. But it makes people angry. It really does. And the thing is, I've been fighting this now for a number of years. I mean, some people have been fighting it far longer than me, and yet it's not going anywhere. You know, I keep being told that woke is dead. I mean, Piers Morgan, for example, had a book out just a couple of months ago proclaiming that woke is dead. And I'm not convinced at all. In fact, I think it's here to stay.
I think it's so interesting that you are such a prominent fighter against this wokeness, being a therapist right now. It seems like that would be kind of a woke area. How is that going over with people, your fellow therapists?
On the whole, awfully, because most therapists are that way inclined, to be honest. I ended up being excommunicated from my master's degree after I started speaking out about some of the gender ideology stuff, and I had to fight litigation for a number of years. And I think most people training and practicing as therapists in the UK are more than happy to go along with this woke agenda. So I actually do think I'm in a minority. I do have colleagues, and we've banded together and formed different groups to try and fight back against this, but it's very difficult. And all of the bodies that oversee psychotherapy are similarly pushing gender ideology, critical race theory, climate change, alarmism. And it's not good because psychotherapists are there and they're meant to support mental health. And I actually think that many psychotherapists in the UK and probably abroad are actually promoting mental ill health and doing the exact opposite of what they're being paid to do.
So do you want to talk about some of the real world problems that are caused by this horrible wokeness? Like one story you had mentioned is that I think maybe a security guard saw what appeared to be a suspicious guy who might be a bomber, but he didn't want to say anything because he didn't want to be accused of racism.
Yeah, I mean, that was in relation to the Manchester Arena bombing, which took place a few years ago, and many people were killed in that, including a number of children. I mean, it was an absolute atrocity. And the security guard said that they had noticed someone looking a bit suspicious, but he was darker skinned, and the security guard said I was too afraid to get it wrong and then be accused of judging this person because of their skin color. And we see that time and time again in society. There's police in the UK who are too afraid to stop and search people from certain ethnic groups. We've seen it with the grooming gangs, atrocity that's also been prevalent in the United Kingdom again, in which these people, although there were suspicions around some of them, they were essentially left alone because they were Pakistani in origin. So people are really quite afraid of being labelled these days as a racist or a xenophobe, and that has real life consequences because it's allowed some horrific crimes to take place. This is the problem with public shaming and with virtue signalling now. And I don't really know what we can do about it because people still continue to be cancelled and shamed for daring to speak out, let's say, about immigration,
Do you want to talk a little bit about the specifics of maybe child abuse for having children undergo unnecessary surgery because of maybe a mental problem they might have temporarily?
Yeah, I mean, this is the trans agenda, to be honest. I mean, gender ideology, this notion that we've all got this innate gender identity and that it's possible to transition between sexes, that is infected society. It's infected our schools. It's infected our hospitals. It's infected our government as well. And, for me, this is probably the most concerning issue of all because it flies in the face of reality, and human beings thrive when they embrace reality, and they tend to not do so well when they embrace delusion or fantasy. And, my practice, I'd say half of my clients at the moment are young children and teenagers who are convinced that they are trapped in the wrong body and want to medically transition. And they want to take powerful hormones that are going to block their puberty. And then they want to eventually undergo surgery and have their breasts or their genitals amputated and surgically removed. And it's a mental health condition, And to some that might be controversial, Tom, but in my view, this is a mental health condition. And we should be treating that as we do any other mental health condition, not giving people irreversible medication and surgery. It's in my mind, it's the biggest safeguarding scandal in the Western world, actually. And the amount of children that have been and continue to be harmed by it is a disgrace.
Yeah, and you mentioned something that I was not aware of, that there is a real mental health condition where a person might think their arm does not belong to them and they want to have their arm amputated. But in that case, doctors won't do it, right? That they won't kowtow to that. But yet for these trans issues, they will actually lop off body parts, correct? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, that's called body integrity identity disorder. Yeah, it's pretty rare, but nonetheless, it paints a picture for us because yes, if someone goes to the doctor and says, I don't like my right leg, can you amputate it for me? If that doctor goes ahead and does that, they not only will they be struck off the medical register, but they'll also be imprisoned for it. This is the only mental health condition, gender dysphoria. This is the only mental health condition that is treated through surgery in this way. A lot of people have got insecurities. In fact, I'd go further than that. I'd say we all have insecurities of some form or another, and a lot of people hate parts of their body and wish they didn't have them and wish they were different. We see this come out in other forms of mental ill health, such as eating disorders, etc. And the answer is not to try and reshape the body. The answer is to try and reshape the mind, to try and get people to a place where they're able to accept themselves as they are. But here, we've got a complete other direction. And actually, we're saying to these children, if you don't like this part of yourself, don't worry. There's a pill or there's a surgical procedure for that. I mean, it flies in the face of the Hippocratic Oath as far as I'm concerned.
So I don't have the graph in front of me and I don't know the terminology, but I saw something about how there was hysteria and maybe up to 9% of kids didn't know what sex they were as of a couple of years ago. But suddenly it plunged back by maybe an order of magnitude. Do you want to comment on that at all? People were saying maybe the opening up of Twitter has helped, and maybe this hysteria peaked a year or two ago.
It's difficult to say, I think I know what study you're talking about, and I also saw a study recently to do with. I think that this study was on American university campuses and looking at surveys of people who identified as trans or non-binary. I don't know. I don't think that the data is comprehensive enough. I can only speak in terms of what I'm seeing, the people that are communicating with me, the clients that I'm receiving every day, the stuff that's still being taught at schools. I think this stuff is still as prevalent as ever. It's very difficult also to capture statistically what's going on because there's a lot of confusion over the language. I mean, we had an issue here in the United Kingdom because we do a census every couple of years to see what the demographics are like. And the most recent census, there was a sharp uptake in certain regions in the UK of people identifying as trans or non-binary. And actually, when they then went back and looked at that and scrutinized that data, they discovered that this uptake was particularly prevalent in areas in which a lot of people, English wasn't their first language. And they looked at the wording of the question and they realized actually it was quite a confusingly worded question anyway. So this is the problem. For a lot of people, they don't even know what you're talking about. If you ask them if they have a gender identity or if their gender identity is the same as their sex assigned when they were born, they won't have a clue what you're on about. So the confusion and the chaos makes it very difficult to actually track really what is going on. Also, got a lot of children who may not be presenting to a clinic and saying they want to medically transition, but they are socially transitioning just in their own family or friendship group. And they're saying, I want to change my name. I want to wear different clothes. I want you to refer to me using different pronouns. And it's very, very difficult to even capture that as data because there's no interaction between them and, let's say, any, authoritative body or medical clinic, if that makes sense.
So I think part of these surgeries are being sold as a way to prevent suicide, that if kids get this, they're less likely. But the data does not support that either, does it?
Not at all. And actually, the government in the UK had to put out a statement essentially saying that there is no correlation between not allowing trans children to transition and then a higher rate of suicide. But that is always being used to manipulate and I think coerce particularly parents into allowing their kids to transition. I mean, I've heard of gender and trans activist groups in the UK saying to parents, well, wouldn't you rather have a trans child than a dead child? And I mean, that is the ultimate form of emotional blackmail and manipulation, but it's simply not borne out in the statistics. And what we're actually seeing, Tom, increasingly are rates of regret amongst those who've transitioned because they realize that they've made a terrible mistake and it's irreversible and there's nothing they can do about it. And that's the type of thing that could drive someone down a dark road of depression, unsurprisingly. But, for most of these kids, the proper treatment is to do nothing. It's to just leave well enough alone. I mean, puberty is a confusing time. Hormones are rushing around. A lot of young girls in particular are feeling very insecure about themselves and their changing bodies. But we've all been through it, and you do come out the other end of it. We need to stop pathologizing just normal puberty-related discomfort.
Yeah, along those lines, I've seen multiple people posting on Twitter that they say, I'm a woman, I'm in my 20s now, and when I was a kid, I was the biggest tomboy in human history, and I'm so glad that nobody forced me to have surgery then because I'm happy as a woman now.
That's it. I mean, that's case in point. And that's the thing, right? Because it's people say, why has there been such a jump in the number of children wanting to transition? It's not because there's more trans children or they were always there, but they were just too afraid to speak out. It's because now they're being offered this silver bullet. You don't like this thing. We've got an answer for that. You don't like the changes that your body's going through as part of puberty. Don't worry, we'll block your puberty. We'll pause it when you have time to consider what you want to do. I mean, it's so unethical and so unnatural, but yet for a child who's experiencing that kind of distress, you can see why it would be appealing for them.
Do you think any of this is being sold for a profit motive, that people are trying to make money selling puberty blockers and being able to charge for the surgery? Is money part of the reason this is happening?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. It's a big money spinner. And actually, people in the United States have to be a bit worried now because there's a woman called Dr. Helen Weberly who set up a thing called Gender GP. And she's essentially been kind of excommunicated from the United Kingdom, but she's now setting up shop in various US states in which she can continue to peddle this stuff and sell these hormones. And she is extremely dangerous. And, she's turning a decent profit. Similarly, if you go onto any of the websites of any of the private clinics in the UK, for example, who are offering these gender affirming surgeries, and it's not just breasts and genitals. I mean, it's everything. I've seen things like calf, this is my pronunciation, calf implants, brow lifts, like forms of vocal surgery and facial feminization surgery. I mean, it's a whole smorgasbord of surgical procedures you can have. And some of them run into the tens of thousands of pounds for a single procedure. So it's a huge money spinner. And I think that's driving a lot of these unethical medical professionals toward providing them.
So yeah, speaking of Helen Weberly, I just saw a tweet that you put up. She argued that sex testing for athletics is equivalent to the Holocaust. And is that a big issue in Britain, maybe, that men want to play women's sports or be on the women's Olympic teams? Is that a big deal?
It is. Yeah. Thankfully, some of the British athletics bodies have seen the light eventually and are now making sure that these sports are sex segregated. And it was also good to see from the International Olympic Committee as well that for the Olympics going forward, again, it's going to be segregated based on sex. But there's still a number of sports that are based in the UK in which men are able to play on women's teams because they identify as female, and and that's both in amateur and professional sport as well. It puts a lot of people off. I spoke to a woman recently who would like to play women's sport, but she's fearful that she's going to be met with a big hulk of a man on the pitch, and she doesn't want that. And I don't blame her.
But it sounds like there are people that sincerely argue that men and women are equal, and that means they have equal athletic ability, and that means why not have men play women's sports? Do you hear that? People actually arguing that?
Yeah, I do. And it's funny because if you ask your standard feminists who are very much about championing equality and equal rights for men and women, they will tell you, not at all. Actually, if you want to protect women, and if you want to treat women fairly, what you do is you do not put them up against men, because we know that there are inherent physiological advantages to being born male and to go through male puberty. And it doesn't matter if you transition. It doesn't actually change the underlying biological makeup at the end of the day and the advantages that you got simply from being male. And that's just the way it goes. And we've seen this through history and other kind of pop culture. I mean, I remember a number of years ago when I think it was Serena Williams said that she thought she could beat any male player that I think was in the top 100 or 200 ranked in the world. And so she played some guy that no one had ever heard of. He was like obviously far lower in the rankings than she was. And she got absolutely annihilated. And she's one of the toughest and strongest female sporting competitors of all time. So we just have to face facts at the end of the day. And that's not doing a disservice to women. It's just acknowledging reality. Men have certain advantages over women and are better at certain things, and women have certain advantages over men and are better at things. But we need to embrace the reality of the situation.
So do you think in the big picture that this wokeness is substituting for religion, and maybe people who are into religion, then they're not nearly as woke? It's one or the other, kind of?
I think certainly the former point that you made, I think there is a bit of a void now as less and less people are actively practicing in a religion and people want something to believe in. And I think the social justice ideologies give them that home and that community and that thing to believe in and that thing to fight for. So yeah, I do think it's filling a bit of a void, and it's a shame because religion, at least if done properly, can teach people morality, whereas a lot of these ideologies are pushing immorality, in my opinion. On the second point you made around whether people who are more religious are less likely to be taken in by this stuff, I don't know really. I mean, I'm not particularly religious myself. I come from a Jewish background. I do work and collaborate with a number of, let's say, Christian-based organizations who are very much aligned with me in these causes. But similarly, I see a lot of this stuff still being pushed in Jewish schools, for example. I've seen guidance put out by, this is now the chief rabbi's office in the United Kingdom, essentially indulging this whole LGBT plus narrative. So I think that religious figures are just as prone to be caught up in all of this. I think primarily because, again, it's a form of virtue signaling, and they don't want to be called in for criticism, and they don't want to have their reputation damaged. So they're happy to go along with the blob on this. And that's not good, right? Because trans ideology, for example, I mean, that flies utterly in the face of religious scripture. Do you know? I mean, it's bizarre that a rabbi could say that trans people exist. It's backwards.
Yeah, I think it's also bizarre that at least a couple popes in a row have pushed the climate scam hard. I think it's particularly crazy that they are all in on the climate scam. So, yeah.
But this is it. People who should be above these issues and should be impartial are not, right? Certain religious figures, I think, should stay out of a lot of this and just stick to what they're meant to be doing, which is the religion. But we see it across society. You know, teachers are meant to be neutral. They're not meant to indoctrinate children in one way or another. They're meant to teach fact and reality. Public sector workers in the UK, in the civil service, are meant to be politically impartial. And yet we see time and time again, they're pushing a certain agenda when they're in office. Therapists are meant to be able to bracket their own personal views and opinions and set them to one side. But I find more and more therapists are actually bringing in their own political and ideological beliefs into the therapy room. I mean, I heard a ridiculous story recently of a therapist who was having a session with their client not long after the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. And this therapist randomly, at the start of the session, said that she wished that the bullets hadn't missed him. Now, I mean, to bring that into a therapy room with a client who may have their own political views, who may have experienced their own trauma, you know, in the past, and to just casually say, I wish that the president of the US had been shot dead. I mean, it's shocking.
Did you have an example that you wanted to share about trans ideology in a computer science class about the word binary? You remember that one?
Of course I do. Yes, I've got an encyclopedia of all these things in my headphone. That example is showing the way in which gender ideology is snuck in through the back door, because it's not taught in the most overt way. It's kind of utilized in other modules and subjects. So yeah, this module that I saw was teaching about computer coding, which we know that coding is kind of done in a binary form, right? And just randomly shoved into the middle of this lesson plan was an instruction for teachers to distinguish for pupils the difference between computer language, which is binary, and human gender identity, which is non-binary. You know, I mean, it's madness. Or, for example, you'll see in maths classes, I've been sent maths lesson plans in which they're talking through, you know, so-and-so has bought this many apples for this price, you know, how much does it cost them? But they've got pronouns after the names of the people in the case study, just shoved in there. It's madness.
Incredible. So you did say that you're getting a lot of these examples sent to you now that you've become well known on X, et cetera, for exposing this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I'm happy to do so. It is depressing, and I feel sorry for my wife because I'm showing her this stuff on a daily basis, and so I don't think it's been too good for my mental health. But yeah, look, I'm happy to be a conduit for it. Because that's the thing, a lot of people are still too afraid to speak out about these things because they're worried that they're going to lose their livelihood and they're going to lose their jobs. And that's the sad fact. You know, we do live in an age of cancel culture, particularly in the United Kingdom still. And I can understand why people don't want to speak out in their own name. I mean, I try and encourage people to do it as much as possible because I don't think things are going to change until more people develop the confidence to do that. But in the meantime, I'm happy to be the whistleblower, I guess.
That's right. You did mention that there is a huge dynamic here where people are willing to say privately to you that they agree, but they are not willing to talk publicly or even to their friend group, maybe. I think it's sad.
Yeah. I mean, well, you know, when I was kicked off my therapy course, yeah, I had nice messages from a number of my colleagues, and a few of them actually said they did support me, but not a single one of them actually spoke up on my behalf at the institute I was studying at. You know, if they had done, maybe I would never have been kicked off. I don't know. But obviously it's nice to receive a message from someone, but it's not the same as knowing that people really have your back. And thing is, if any of them had been kicked off for having the wrong opinion, I'd have stuck up for them. And it's that lack of mutuality that I think upsets me the most. I think we need to start standing up for other people, even if we disagree with their opinions. You know, that's why I support free speech to the fullest extent, because at the end of the day, you only realize how important free speech is when they come for you.
I do think there's safety in numbers, and I'm seeing it in the climate world that I do think people feel safer now to say this is all BS. I'm seeing so much more of that now, safety in numbers. And I think with the trans issues and everything else, if just more people would have the guts to just speak out, I think there would be a snowball effect and this could end relatively quickly. Do you agree?
I do.
Yeah.
The problem is that with the gender stuff, it's kind of seeped into our social fabric now. It's seeped into language. These terms, LGBT, roll off the tongue so easily, and it's kind of been a form of societal brainwashing, and we need to now find a way to reverse that brainwashing. But look, I agree with you. The more people speak out about this, the better. And the tide has turned. I mean, even the way in which the media are reporting on these issues is significantly better than it was in the past. I think in the past, some big media outlets were too afraid to touch this issue, whereas now they're reporting on it every day. So that's good to see. I think politically speaking, that's where the action has to take place. And I saw what Donald Trump did with his various executive orders when he came into power, and that was great to see. Unfortunately, I'm living in a country in which our prime minister seems to believe that women can have a penis. So, we're not quite as far along as other parts of the world on that.
I do see a dynamic, I think, where comedians are willing to just say stuff that's funny and they don't have to be as woke, and they're more funny now than they were 5 years ago. I take some hope from that.
Yes, I do. I think there's been some comedians that have been willing to push the envelope on that. But then again, there's certain kind of classic, let's say, sitcoms that have been pulled from the television because they're deemed to be offensive. Yeah. I mean, there's a program, I don't know if you've heard of it, there's a program called Little Britain, which was it's kind of a parody and comedy show, taking the piss out of all sorts of kind of British people. And I mean, some of it was very offensive, I would say. But the thing is that it was equally offensive for everyone. They weren't picking and singling people out. They took the piss out of everyone. And it was very funny. Yes, it was a bit below the belt, but that's been pulled now. I mean, you actually can't watch that on any kind of standard British streaming services. And I think that's really quite a bad thing, right? Because if we can't laugh at ourselves and at each other, then, I mean, what hope have we got? So I'm glad to see some comedians are pushing back. But I think generally we've entered a world now in which people have to be very careful about the kind of jokes they make. And I think it's a shame, And look, I'm Irish and I'm Jewish, and I love a Jewish or Irish joke as much as anyone. I think we have to be able to laugh at ourselves and not take everything so damn seriously.
So I didn't check back, but were you active with this politically incorrect stuff back before Twitter was acquired by Musk? And did you see a big change if you were at that time?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was pretty late to Twitter. I think I only got it around 2019, 2020. And yeah, a huge shift since he took over. I mean, first and foremost, the reinstating of a lot of accounts that had been, permanently suspended. For example, Graham Linehan, who's Irish TV comedy producer, who's also been very, very vocal in the United Kingdom on the trans issue. He had his account restored by Musk, as well as many others. And not all of the accounts that were restored were people that I agree with. I think there are some people there who have quite dangerous views on things. However, as I said, I support free speech. So it's good to be able to have those debates. And Elon's taken the gender stuff particularly seriously, which has been good to see as well. And look, social media can be a bit of a cesspit at times, and I certainly am on the receiving end of a lot of hate and a lot of trolling. But I would still rather we had free speech than didn't. And so on that basis, I'm very pleased that Elon took over Twitter, now X, and long may it continue.
Are you a fan of Substack or the free speech out there? Is that working out well?
Yeah, I've got a small Substack. I could think that's again been a very good vehicle for people who don't want to rely on traditional, media outlets, really. I mean, with the explosion of Substack and blogging, with the explosion of podcasts and YouTube shows and all the rest of it, it's good, right? Because anyone can actually have a voice. And you literally can just start recording something in your basement, and it can go viral and it can make an impact. And I think I've got a lot of concerns about social media and technology, but I think that's one of the real benefits of it, actually. It's really opened up channels of communication, possibility to influence what's going on in the world.
So do you do therapy remotely, and where people from other countries could pay to talk to you, either the parents or the kids could talk to you about these issues?
I do. I'd say at the moment, probably half my clients are based outside of the United Kingdom. I've got clients in Canada, in America, in Australia. And because I think a lot of people in those countries don't know where to turn to either for a therapist that's not going to push any of these ideologies on them. I work fully remotely at the moment, which is a bit of a shame because I do like seeing clients in person. But to be honest with you, Tom, I mean, part of that decision was around safety concerns, because there's a lot of activists in the United Kingdom who don't like me very much, and from some of the messages I receive, would love to see me injured or even killed. So I'm not sure I feel in the right headspace at the moment to risk that. And that's the sad truth. And maybe I need to be more resilient. I don't know. It's something I'm thinking about. But at the moment, it's just not a risk I'm wanting to take.
Any other points you want to make before we finish up here?
I think just noticing the intersection between all of these different ideologies. Obviously, you come at these things, particularly around the climate. But there's overlap between all of these different ideologies. I mean, I'm working on a book proposal at the moment where I'm essentially diagnosing a new mental health condition, which it's probably not going to make me very popular because I'm diagnosing probably a big chunk of society with this condition, but it's called the victim virus. I've pulled out different cognitive distortions that we can see across society and how they come together to form this social contagion. And we see it across the board with all of these different ideologies, and it's the same kind of people, and it's the same strategy, it's the same mindset. So it's interesting from that perspective, but it's also very worrying. And I don't like the way society is going generally, if I'm honest with you. And, I'm considering starting a family of my own in the not too distant future. And, I'm trying not to engage in catastrophizing myself, but I'm worried. I'm worried about the kind of world that my child in the future would be brought into. I'm worried about the type of stuff they've been taught in schools. I'm worried about some of the nefarious people out there who seem hell-bent on grooming or indoctrinating children. So I don't know. I'm really hoping that things continue to change for the better. And as you said earlier, that people find their voice and strength in numbers and all of this. But I don't think it's going to go anywhere fast. But it's important that you and I and others continue to have these conversations, right? Because without shining a spotlight on this, nothing will ever change. So I'm trying to remain as optimistic as I possibly can.
All right. I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. It sounds like it's come at a personal cost to yourself, but I think it's so important that you're speaking out. So thank you for what you're doing. And it looks like people can follow you at James Esses on Twitter. Is that a good place to find your work, right?
Yeah, that's where I spend most of my time these days. And for people who might want therapy with me, for example, I've got a website. It's jamesesses.com, and you can contact me via there. And I'm always happy to speak to people.